Personalism. Lomba.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second workshop for entertainment and culture-based climate solutions. And the title for this workshop is Cultural Heritage in Global Climate Action. Thank you so much for joining. We are supremely excited to have you all here again. We had so much fun last week, and we're excited to get going. We're still waiting for a few more folks to join. As folks join, I'm going to go through some technical FAQs. So on the next slide, our friends at UNFCCC have shared some answers to questions that you all have been asking. So a couple of housekeeping things. Your attendance is tracked via Zoom, so please ensure that you are on Zoom with the full name that you use to register for these workshops. You will get a digital certificate upon completion of the Climate Catalysts mentorship program, provided you attend all sessions in full. And if you're having trouble creating an account, please email Youth for Capacity at this email address. Feel free to take a screenshot of the slide. We'll make sure you have these instructions later as well. And then on the next slide, we also want to share some community guidelines to maintain a respectful and inclusive environment for everyone. So first, keeping it professional. It is great to connect with people as professionals and as climate activists. That's why we're all here. And in some cases, you might want to follow each other's work or collaborate on a project. So it might be okay to ask for someone's personal social media or exchange phone numbers. However, if you do not know someone, avoid asking people for their personal contact information. Second, sharing things beyond the workshop. You are welcome to share your learnings and images from the session on your social media. But remember two things. One, please do not post any individual's image without their consent. And second, do post with context. So if you're posting a speaker's image, for example, ensure that the focus is on their content, on slides, on what they're saying, instead of their face or picture. Also, please utilize critical thinking. We realize that everyone has different levels of proficiency in the English language. So it's totally okay if you make grammatical errors or spelling errors in any of our tasks, anything that you add to the Bootcamp channel. But please do not use AI for your work. It takes away from our ability to think. And while we didn't call it out for workshop one, we can tell. So we really, really encourage that we use our critical thinking and avoid excessive emissions that generative AI also creates. And then finally, please stay on mute when you are not speaking so that everyone can have a smooth experience. And on that note, if you'd like to stay connected with the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion and include us in your network, Sam, if you go to the next slide, you'll see these QR codes. You can follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn. It helps us continue building a community for culture-based climate action. And the larger the community, the more effective we can be. And as a reminder, the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion is a nonprofit space for culture-based climate action. We have put together these workshops with thanks to our peers at the UNFCCC. You'll see familiar faces in today's meeting as well on the next slide. You'll see that 3 of us from the last workshop have also joined today and will be with you in the third workshop as well. We have Samuel Rubin, Gunjan Nanda, the co-founders of the ENC Pavilion, and myself, Sanya Irfan, strategy and operations consultant. All right, so what will we do today? Let's quickly go through the agenda. I will take you through our session objectives. Sam will frame context, talk about the role of cultural heritage in climate frameworks. Gunjan will take us through legacy solutions. She'll talk about examples of cultural heritage and strategies to use them in global climate action. And we are very lucky to have 2 guest speakers with us today. We have Kamori Ostananda, who will join us to do a case study on cultural heritage in Thailand. She'll speak to her experiences as a youth negotiator. We also have Kyra Northwest, who will talk about Indigenous-led buffalo rematriation efforts. We will have time for Q&A. This time we'll ask you to reserve your questions till the Q&A section, at which point we'll ask you to drop your questions in the chat. Finally, we'll do an interactive exercise. No breakout rooms this time, but we will all collaborate. We'll work on a map to document cultural heritage from across the world, and then we will close. So let's quickly go through our objectives. We've divided these into 2 sections. One is learning. So we want to understand how cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible, is impacted by climate change and why its protection is vital for climate justice and resilience. We specifically want to recognize the value of Indigenous knowledge systems, storytelling traditions, and ancestral land stewardship as critical tools in climate adaptation and mitigation. And we want to learn from global case studies that demonstrate how cultural heritage has been successfully integrated into climate policy and grassroots climate action. The next part is applying these. So by the end of this workshop, we want you to be able to identify entry points, which you'll see on the next slide, for incorporating cultural heritage into your own climate advocacy, storytelling, and community-led initiatives. We want you to gain an understanding of how to engage with UN processes and frameworks specifically through a cultural lens, and then reflect on your own cultural roots and community traditions as not only things that need to be protected, but also as assets for climate resilience and innovation. So with that, let's get learning. Over to you, Sam.
Let me unmute myself. Thank you so much, Sanya. It's so great to see all of you. We have more than 200 joining from all over the world, and it's great to see many of you again. Let's begin by framing some conceptual terms before we get into specific examples. And no, I cannot promise you that today we will learn about the origin of the pyramid. But if someone knows, please drop the answer in the chat. We're going to get started by defining what is exactly cultural heritage. Cultural heritage refers to the legacy of physical artifacts and intangible attributes inherited from past generations that are passed on to future generations. It includes places, practices, language, knowledge, and values that shape a community's identities and worldview. So cultural heritage can help communities understand who are they, where they come from, and how can they relate to the world and environment around them. So there are 2 types of cultural heritage that you might already be familiar with. One, there is tangible cultural heritage, which includes physical, material objects and places that have cultural, historical, or spiritual significance. This can be movable, like, not specifically an iPhone, but art and artifacts and tools, or immovable, like temples, buildings, landscapes, and archaeological sites. And then we have intangible cultural heritage, which refers to the living expressions and traditions passed down through generations. These include oral traditions, rituals, languages, festivals, craft, music, dance, ceremonies, traditional knowledge systems, and they are often deeply tied to a community's relationship with the land, memory, and identity. So let's take a look at different examples of both tangible and intangible heritage, which, for instance, are under increasing risk because of climate change. Many of you may be familiar with Venice, Italy, which is famous for its canals and its beautiful streets with the boats. But Venice is precisely as a UNESCO World Heritage Site under threat due to rising sea levels and frequent flooding, which is threatening the city from structural collapse. There is also, for instance, the Timbuktu Mosque in Mali, which are under threat because climate change is affecting them due to desertification, water scarcity, and extreme weather events. And these are affecting the mosque integral structure and ability to survive over time. And also on the intangible heritage, for instance, uh, Andean water rituals and indigenous cosmology are also impacted because the glaciers are melting in the Andes, which is altering access to water, threatening ritual cycles tied to the Pachamama and ancestral water spirits, and also the Arctic indigenous communities are impacted because climate-induced displacement is impacting the elders and their ability to transfer knowledge intergenerationally. So these are just a few examples of how climate is impacting both intangible and tangible heritage. But despite being directly affected by it, culture from art to heritage in all of its tangible and intangible forms, uh, specifically including indigenous ways of knowing and diverse knowledge systems, are a missing force in climate planning with the power to deliver transformative climate action. So, for instance, did you know that none of the final COP decisions, which, as many of you may be familiar, at the end of every conference of the parties, of every climate conference, there is a landmark document, a decision in which the parties come together around consensus and agree on several policies. Never in any of these final texts of the COP has the word culture been recognized, nor cultural heritage has been recognized as as a climate solution. So this is a climate culture gap that we are here spotlighting today, and that is also starting to change. So we're going to take a look at some policy advances that are slowly bringing culture into climate framework. One major turning point is tied to one of the climate movement biggest wins, which is the loss and damage agreement. And maybe many of you today are already familiar with the term loss and damage. Loss and damage refers to the harms caused by climate change that go beyond what mitigation and adaptation can prevent. So irreparable damage. And these include both economic losses like infrastructure damage and also non-economic losses, which include cultural heritage. At COP27, after many years of negotiations, pretty much in the first COP that was made, the UNCCC was able to gather parties to agree to create a loss and damage fund to support developing countries facing these irreversible impacts. And in the slide right now, you see what some of the impacts impacting uh, heritage might be, whether if it's a storm surge or sea level rise or salinization or increase in temperatures, etc., and the impact that they can have on economic losses or non-economic losses. Non-economic losses are additional to the loss of property, so not assets or infrastructure or agricultural production, but those that are not as easily quantifiable in economic terms. If we lose an entire language, we might not put a price tag on that, but that's a very valuable legacy that is vanishing under the effects of climate change. So cultural heritage, indigenous knowledge, societal cultural identity, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. Those, for instance, fall under the non-economic losses covered by loss and damage. And so we also want to highlight another important climate policy that has paved the way for the inclusion of culture, which is the Global Goal on Adaptation, also known as GCA. The GCA is a collective commitment under Article 7 of the Paris Agreement, which you can see here on the screen, and it basically aims at enhancing the world's adaptive capacity and strengthening resilience and reducing vulnerability to climate change. So, how do we adapt to the increasing risk of climate change? How do we prepare beyond mitigation to assume the reality of the climate crisis we are living in? So the GCA has developed in several policies and implementation strategies. One of them is the UAE Framework for Global Climate Resilience, also known as UFGCR, another acronym to try to hold on to. And it presents a comprehensive approach to enhance adaptive capacity and strengthen resilience and reduce vulnerability to climate change. And so when we talk about all these policies, which I recognize it's a form of gatekeeping some communities from participating in these processes, why does it matter? Well, in the case of the UFGCR, it matters because it presents a unifying framework that can drive political action and finance for adaptation on the same scale as mitigation. And most importantly, it calls for specific, measurable targets and guidelines for global adaptation action. So, for instance, cultural heritage is one of the key thematic targets of UFGCR, in addition to water, food and agriculture, health, nature and biodiversity. And what that looks like, if you see this diagram on the screen, is basically assessing impacts and vulnerabilities, planning and implementation strategy, and most importantly, as we were saying, those specific measurable targets so that the parties, when they are reporting their NDCs, their national determined contribution, their climate policies, they know how to measure impacts on cultural heritage and non-economic losses. But beyond UNCCC, the UN Climate Change Secretariat, UNESCO is the United Nations agency that promotes education, science, culture, and communication to foster peace and equality worldwide. And the World Heritage Convention was adopted by UNESCO in 1972, which is one of the main international treaties linking cultural and natural heritage in a single framework. This World Heritage Convention recognizes the deep interdependence between people and nature and commits to countries to identify, protect, and conserve sites of outstanding universal value, including landscapes, monuments, and ecosystems that embody cultural or spiritual meaning. So here in the screen you see uh, many of the World Heritage List sites, which include 1,223 properties, forming part of the cultural and natural heritage, which the World Heritage Committee considers as having outstanding universal value. And these include 952 cultural sites, 231 sites, and these are from over 168 of the 196 parties that have ratified the World Heritage Convention. But the real challenge now is bridging the gap between the cultural and climate institutions, especially between UNESCO and UNCCC. Initiatives like the Loss and Damage, the Global Goal on Adaptation, and the UAE Framework offer a pathway to connecting these dots and to embed the protection of cultural heritage into global climate resilience efforts. So now that we have grounded ourselves in this framing, concept, risk, and policy developments, let's turn to concrete examples of how cultural heritage is already driving climate action on the ground. Over to you, Gunjan.
Thank you so much, Sam. Hi, everyone. So as you know, Sam has very rightly pointed out and highlighted, the actual key statistics and, characteristics that we need to know within the cultural climate framework, I rightly want to point out how cultural heritage and global climate action makes a difference through legacy solutions. Next slide, please. So it's a very important quote, and it's a very important learning that I think we all need to consider, is when land disappears, stories go with it. And this line is not just poetic, it's very painfully real. Something that's a commonality across disciplines, cultural heritage is often viewed as something to be preserved. Next slide, please. Culture hasn't been a driver of solutions, yet it holds centuries of adaptation, knowledge passed down through song, craft, food systems, architecture, and storytelling. And in the face of climate breakdown, we're not just losing land, we're losing entire knowledge systems. So what happens when sacred lands are submerged? When language dies because communities are displaced? So very rightly, when land disappears, stories go with it. In the next slide, so this points out the dominant, climate strategies, which are largely becoming technocentric, which are focused on net zero targets, green finance, electric vehicles, or carbon markets. But as you can see here, cultural memory, traditional ecological knowledge, and intergenerational storytelling barely feature. So on the left circle, these are all of the current mechanisms at play, which we are, slowly, well, not slowly, but very rapidly adapting to, which is very much technocentric. And on the right side, which is the pink circle, is all of the indigenous wisdom, knowledge transfer, and heritage that we see here. So the overlap between mainstream solutions and cultural strategies is very tiny, and that's a problem. We have some bare overlaps where indigenous participation in the UNFCCC is there, though it's still tokenized or very limited. We have local knowledge cited in some adaptation plans like the IPCC working group reports. We have, use of traditional ecological knowledge in rewilding and conservation, yet that's also to an extent. So while we have these policies that are chasing targets, communities are living through these realities, often without access to platforms or protection. So I would love for you to drop what you think are the much needed overlaps in the left and the right circles in the chat. And we'd love to see your responses as to what you think needs to be these overlaps here. In the next slide, I would really like to also mention here our research briefing, which we launched last year during COP29, Legacy Solutions. And this is where, the part around cultural heritage and global climate action comes in. This briefing has been developed by the ENC in partnership with Zero Carbon Analytics and Climate Reframe. And this is one of the few pieces of research that examines cultural heritage not as a soft nice to have, but as a vital climate solution. And it particularly highlights cultural heritage in the context of non-economic loss and damage, but is loss of language, spiritual sites, crafts, or knowledge systems that don't have a price tag, but are deeply tied to identity and survival. You can also read the actual briefing here by scanning the QR code from your phone, and feel free to review and look at the actual examples at play here. And in the next slide, I do want to point out, why this briefing is so relevant and what it makes the case for. So from viewing heritage sites as static to seeing it as adaptive, we also see cultural loss as, collateral damage to recognizing it as a core dimension of climate justice. And it also serves from top-down solutions to co-created frameworks where local voices lead design and implementation. So let me give you a few real-world examples. You'll see here in Brazil, the Ticuna people of the Amazon hold spiritual cosmologies that guide biodiversity stewardship. And these traditions shape how they care for soil, water, and species. In the next slide, we have Kenya, the Mhikenda people. They're the protectors of the sacred Kaya forests, inscribed as UNESCO World Heritage. And these forests are not just ecosystems, but living archives, holding prayers, ceremonies, and burial rituals central to Mekanda identity. But climate shifts and land encroachments are threatening both the forest and their ancestral way of life. In India and Bangladesh, the Sundarbans are home to over 4 million people. Mangrove knowledge has been passed down over generations: how to interpret tides, grow salt-resistant rice, build stilt homes. But with rising sea levels and forced migration, this knowledge risks being erased. In the next slide, in Colombia, the Bayou people use weaving and oral poetry to pass down knowledge of rain cycles and desert resilience. These aren't just symbolic practices. They are they are functional climate strategies that modern frameworks still overlook. And these strategies are what Legacy Solutions aims to center and protect. In the next slide, I want to provide a living example of this work, which is what I'm personally doing with the House of Artisans in Abu Dhabi in the UAE, where I serve as a program and design development mentor for the House of Artisans design competition. So through a national design competition, which is supported by Mubadala and Abu Dhabi Culture, we're working with young and established artists to not only preserve, but reimagine Emirati craft traditions in a changing world, from sadu weaving to palm frond work to woodcraft and metal inlay. And you know what's exciting is how these young creatives are exploring circularity, climate storytelling, and sustainability within these traditional frameworks, making it tangible and tactile in our modern day lifestyle. And this is exactly what we mean by legacy solutions. This is not preservation as a museum piece, but preservation through practice, evolution, and everyday relevance. In the next slide, you'll see some beautiful visuals and process videos here. This is Sadu, Tali, and Kus in practice, and these are core to the Emirati culture and legacy. And if anyone here is from the UAE, you're welcome to see these artisans in action at the House of Artisans space in Abu Dhabi. In the next slide, which is a very, very important learning piece that I've come to also realize, is that preservation doesn't just mean freezing tradition. It means evolving it so it can breathe in today's world. So it's not just about preserving heritage in a glass case, right? It's about how do you activate this in everyday life and revive its purpose in a changing climate. And as we, the ENC Pavilion, prepare for COP30 in Berlin this year, this briefing is also our invitation to policymakers, funders, and culture makers alike to champion cultural heritage, not just as something to save, but as a solution to scale. I will be happy to take any questions that you have in our Q&A segment towards the end, but for now, over to you, Sanya.
All right, thanks Gunjan. Thanks Sam for setting this up for us. Now we are very fortunate to have with us Kamori Ostananda. Kamori is based in Bangkok, and her research and work concerns the gender-climate nexus as well as culture-based climate action. Kamori was Thailand's first and only climate youth negotiator at COP29 last year, having served as a Thai delegate during COP28. She is also Thailand's local impact producer for our very own entertainment and culture pavilion. In March of this year, she represented Thailand at the 69th UN Commission on the Status of Women. Thank you very much for being with us, Kamori. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sanya, for the introduction. Hi, I'm Kamori. Today, let's dive into this case study from Thailand, which concerns cultural heritage and climate adversity. What you see here in front of you is Wat Chai Watanararam, or the temple Watanararam, which is part of the Ayutthaya Kingdom. So Thailand has a very old history. We've existed for at least around 2,500 years. This was a temple that was part of an ancient kingdom of Thailand. And this temple was unfortunately flooded during the past decade. So this is actually what you're seeing here is a restored piece of the ancient temple that was flooded. That was restored by the World Monuments Fund, which was a cohesive effort joined by the U.S. Embassy and also Thai local authorities. Next slide, please. you can see that during the flood, the water in the city and province of Ayutthaya has risen to the temple walls, and the levels of the temple walls have been flooded entirely. So a lot of infrastructure, architecture, and interior has been impacted. And these temples, because they are ancient, they preserve the ancient techniques of Thai craftsmen that have existed almost 2 centuries ago. And to see a monumental site being flooded isn't only a physical manifestation of climate adversity, it is also quite literally the loss of heritage, because a lot of techniques that were used to craft a lot of interiors and exteriors of this temple can no longer be seen when it has been impacted by the flood. So because of the effort with the World Monuments Fund and also the Ministry of Interior and also the Ministry of Fine Arts, we're still able to see some emulated styles and techniques of the craftsmen. However, it is not the original, and it is not the ancient techniques that we would be able to see if the flooding didn't happen. Next slide, please. We see that this is the scaffolding that was constructed by the joint collaboration of World Monuments Fund and the authorities and parties I mentioned. This was actually a very interesting project because it does not only symbolize how cultural heritage is directly impacted by climate adversity, it also highlights how local communities and local voices is uplifted through repatriation efforts and also through efforts that are taken to restore architectural and heritage sites. Next slide, please. You can see that a lot of artisans who work in the exteriors and interiors of the temple are actually Thai local Ayutthaya people who are trained and who have undergone capacity building by the World Monuments Fund in order to better understand how ancient craftsmen have been able to construct such elaborate designs, which no longer exist, but can still kind of emulate this cultural legacy that is seek to be passed down through generations. So, you know, in every sky comes a silver lining. Although the site was flooded, although the monuments were impacted, we see this capacity building effort among local communities that would not have happened if, you know, international attention wasn't drawn to the flooding, if World Monuments Fund didn't step in, and if local Thai authorities didn't collaborate. Next slide, please. We see that through this flooding and this restoration effort, a lot of local communities of varying ages, gender, and generations, they're brought together to, you know, confront their heritage, but also understand how these legacy craftsmanship can be learned and can be practiced within the modern day context. And it's not only merely a flooding restoration effort of the temple, it's also this ability for grassroots community to feel empowered that the heritage sites that they see within their provinces, within their immediate environment, are able to be restored. And I think with this effort, with the World Monument Fund, the local communities feel more confident in terms of being able to steward their heritage and being able to pass down this very ancient craft 2 centuries ago to their children. So this is something that is beautiful that came out of the flooding and the consequences of the flooding. Next slide, please. And this is now how the temple stands today at night. The temple is now a tourist destination, and it's able to generate income for the local community, but also it can serve as a learning space of heritage in immediate local communities. I want to bring this case study to you all today to have it serve as a standing piece of how heritage can be impacted by climate adversity, but also how the efforts towards its restoration, or how cultural heritage, whether it's restoring, building, or weaving together stories, it still continues to bring people together through generations and through centuries. So I think it remains a very beautiful thing amidst the climate adversity that has been happening. Next slide, please. And you can see how this is the CGI, or the computer-generated image by UNESCO, that was developed of how the temple used to be around 2 centuries ago. You can see a lot of labels that are in Thai. All of them are important part of Thai architecture. And you can see in comparison to the previous image, a lot of them has been damaged, not only due to the flood, but also due to the erosion as the temple ages. But without the restoration and without the ability for current technology to reimagine what the temple looked like, a lot of Thai architectural heritage and legacy would have been lost. And this ability, this timing of us having the technology to provide reimaginings of the past, but also the local communities and frontliners who are willing to reimagine what tradition and culture and heritage can be, I think is a very opportune timing for us to really tackle and deal with heritage as a global community together. Next slide, please. So this is the entirety of the floor plan of the temple, and you can see how ancient construction efforts are created through the villages, scaffoldings through the left. So when you compare and contrast the scaffoldings in the previous images that are made by local communities of the modern day, and you compare it to this image of the scaffoldings made by people of the past, you can see that heritage is a living thing. Just like what Gunjan has said, culture is a living thing. It is not something that is supposed to be starved in a museum. We can, very well put this temple in a museum in Thailand. However, you would not be able to fly to Ayutthaya today and feel, the artisans crafting or the cultural heritage that has been handed down generation through century. So to be able to preserve heritage is a privilege, and to be able to continue upholding that privilege has to be done through acknowledging climate adversity and climate solutions together. Next slide, please. So these are the reimagined interiors of the temple in the past. And you can see, of course, how much the flooding and the erosion has destroyed or has affected these interiors. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the end of this case study. I'd be more than happy to take in any questions you may have for me. But now I'll pass it on to Kyra.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kamori. This was such a powerful example. And now we are joined by Kyra Northwest, who will take us to another part of the world. Kyra is a proud member of the Montana First Nation Akamic, one of the 4 Musqueam Cree nations located within Treaty 6 territory in what is now Alberta, Canada. Currently, she serves as the consultation and lands manager for her nation. In her role, she focuses on ensuring the protection of treaty and Indigenous rights while advocating for the principles of free, prior, and informed consent. Kyra has worked with Indigenous advisory and monitoring committees and the Canadian federal government to boost Indigenous government and self-determination. As a founding member of the International Buffalo Relations Institute, Kyra is dedicated to promoting the implementation of the Buffalo Treaty, which she'll tell us a bit more about, and supporting Indigenous nations in repatriating buffalo to their lands, revitalizing important cultural and ecological connections. Thank you so much for being with us, Kyra. I'll pass it over to you to let you tell us about your important work.
Danse, Gadadamskat Nawal Gakio, Ogisagosquao Nitsigasun, Agameko Chinia. So good day, everybody. I'm so happy to be here and so excited to see so many beautiful faces from around the world. I really thank you, Kamori, for sharing your knowledge with us here today. So you can go to the next slide, please. So a little bit about myself. I am a Cree Nehiawasquel from the Montana First Nation, one of the 4 Musqueam Cree Nations in Treaty 6 territory in what is now Alberta, Canada. I do work for my home community in lands and consultation, and I also sit on the board for the International Buffalo Relations Institute, which is an Indigenous non-for-profit that supports and implements the Buffalo Treaty. My work began with buffalo in 2017. I was asked to help and support a ceremonial transfer of 16 live bison from Elk Island National Park to Banff National Park in Alberta. At the time, I didn't really realize what a journey it would lead me on, as this has become a very foundational part of my life and the work that I do now. As a young Indigenous woman from the prairies, I grew up very deeply rooted in my culture. I grew up with my grandparents and my great-grandparents in my community. I attended ceremonies. I learned about songs, stories, and then also about our spiritual connection to our relative, the buffalo. But there was a big disconnect there, as I had not had the opportunity to see buffalo on the lands. I did not have the opportunity to have that relationship with them, other than hearing the significance through these songs, these ceremonies, and the stories. So in saying that, the only opportunity that I actually had to spend time with them was to be going to parks and to zoos, which created a very distorted kind of thinking of how we have access to these animals that are so significant to our way of life in the prairies. We can go to the next slide, please. So I'm here to talk about some Indigenous-led buffalo rematriation efforts that we have been supporting and highlighting in North America. The work that I really want to highlight and talk about is the Buffalo Treaty. So the Buffalo Treaty was signed in September of 2014 on the Blackfoot Reservation in Montana in the US. It was the first inter-Indigenous treaty of its kind in over 200 years in North America. And there were 8 Indigenous nations from across Canada and the US that first signed the treaty. So there was 4 from the US and 4 from Canada. So they collectively shared that they wanted to welcome back buffalo into their territories, but also to reaffirm the deep cultural, spiritual, environmental connections that Indigenous people of the prairies have with the buffalo as a relative. The treaty really does represent a commitment to revitalizing these relationships, but also to restoring the land for future generations and restoring natural prairie grasslands. I have to say the history of the buffalo is a painful one, and I believe that as Indigenous peoples of the prairies, our paths are very intertwined. The disappearance of the buffalo coincided with a time of forced government assimilation policies that created the removal of Indigenous peoples and the buffalo from the landscape. This really deeply impacted our way of life. It really impacted our environment and our lands. The removal of such a vital species created a profound impact to all of us. And I think that these are still impacts that we're feeling today. I really enjoyed the quote and thinking about when the land disappears, the stories go with it. I think that even when the land disappears and when some of our relatives that we see, animals that we see as relatives disappear, sometimes also those stories go with them as well. So when we're talking about the work of buffalo rematriation, we're very intentional in using that terminology. The word rematriation and the return of buffalo to Indigenous lands is returning the sacred relationship that we have with the lands, the ecosystems, and with other beings, not just ourselves as humans. It's not just about returning buffalo to the lands. It's about reconnection, and it's also about healing for Indigenous peoples. You can go to the next slide, please. So this is just a map of our signatory nations that have been involved in the Buffalo Treaty. As you can see, the majority of the signatories are from the prairie regions of North America, in Canada and the US. We do have signatories up in Alaska and down south towards Texas. And from the first 8 that we had in 2014, over the last 10 years, we've grown to about 52 signatories, Indigenous nations that are signatories. We have a new international relative who joined. So we have signatories now from New Zealand as of September 24, 2024. So it has grown. It is a very big treaty. We also have space for individuals and NGOs and organizations to sign as supporters of the treaty. So we have the Indigenous nations that themselves as sovereign nations can sign the treaty. And then we also make space for individuals or organizations or NGOs that also want to support the work of the Buffalo Treaty. We can go to the next slide. For the implementation of the treaty, there is a lot of collaborative efforts that happen and that are supported through the International Buffalo Relations Institute. So these are just some of the examples of different projects that have been kind of working towards this multifaceted approach that includes ecological restoration, cultural revitalization, and then also the reestablishment of Indigenous sovereignty over lands. So these are just examples of the different ways people have been implementing the treaty. If you go to the next slide, I have some highlights of these. So the first one I really want to talk about is the film Singing Back the Buffalo. This film was created and done by award-winning filmmaker Dr. Tasha Hubbard. The film itself raises awareness about buffalo and the stories, the historical injustices that the buffalo had faced. So it raises awareness about that, but it also follows different Indigenous visionaries across North America and highlights the different Indigenous nations that are working on repatriating buffalo back to their lands. I also want to give a quick shout out to Samuel, who was the impact producer for this film. The film premiered last year at the Big Sky Music Festival in the state of Montana. There is currently a 1-hour version on the CBC's Nature of Things through CBC Gem and also on the CBC Nature of Things YouTube channel. There is going to be a full feature later in 2025 on the Aboriginal Peoples Television Network. And it also was screened at COP16, also helped with, thanks to Sam for organizing that. So I think that things like films really highlight Indigenous storytelling and show audiovisual sovereignty of our own stories. And they play such a crucial role of providing the tools that we can utilize to reclaim our narratives and communicate our different perspectives that we have. And I think that this is Tasha's film is a prime example of doing just that. Also, another initiative that I want to highlight that was in early February of this year, the Fort Peck Indian Reservation in Montana, who was an original signatory to the Buffalo Treaty, gifted 11 Plains Yellowstone bison to the Mosquito, Grizzly Bear, Head, Lean Man First Nation in Saskatchewan in Canada. So this marked the first time buffalo were able to cross the border since it had been imposed on Indigenous peoples. So it was a very historical and emotional day. But it also, the gifting of one of these buffalo from one Indigenous nation to another really reflected traditional gift-giving economies, and also what was much practiced by First Nations in the prairies. And so this practice was deeply rooted in ceremony. There had been a lot of ceremonial songs, gift giving, and things of that nature that came along with the transfer of these bison. We also hosted the 10th year anniversary of the Buffalo Treaty signing in September 2024. So we had over 1,700 attendees. which included participants, organizers, elders, Indigenous youth, guides, and then we also had youth facilitators and volunteers. So we had 500 youth actually attend the renewal gathering, and they were able to participate in different Indigenous-led art making, different storytelling opportunities, and it was just a really big, amazing event that we hosted. So through those efforts, one of the big things that we really try to support is Indigenous youth and the involvement of Indigenous youth in the work that we do. We host Buffalo Treaty Youth Camps, and these camps are meant to foster intergenerational resilience. And we engage youth through education, through mentoring, and ceremonies that help connect them to the buffalo and to the land. So typically what we do is we take the youth out into different areas of Alberta and different national parks. And these experiences really help build a strong cultural foundation for the younger generations. When the youth are able to connect with the landscape and with the buffalo, it really helps remind them of their roles in the broader community, and it helps them to foster a real sense of pride and identity. And also, one big thing is I think that a lot of these youth don't have access, and they don't have opportunities to be in these spaces a lot. So it really does give them this recognition that they have a place in the world, and that they also are caretakers of this land, and they belong in these areas. Another initiative that I've been heavily involved with in implementing the treaty is an Indigenous-led buffalo hike to Banff National Park. This is very significant as for myself personally, because this is the herd that was supported from Elk Island to Banff National Park, and I helped with those transfer ceremonies. So these hikes are actually guided by Indigenous women and led by Indigenous women. So we have groups of women that go out, and it's guided in song, ceremony, and offerings. So for me, myself, before the hike, and when I went, one of my grandmothers actually gifted me a buffalo song to take with me when I went out onto the hike. So these songs that we were gifted in these offerings really remind us that these practices, cultural practices and ceremony, also help protect and care for the land. It really shows a reciprocity and reciprocal relationship that we have with the land and with our relatives. And I think that one of the big things that I didn't realize until I had been there was that how long has it been since Indigenous women had been in this space? How long had it been since Indigenous women sang to these lands, sang to these animals, and gave offerings as a sign of respect and reciprocity? So I think that these examples really show that deep connection and cultural heritage, but also I really do feel that these ceremonies and these practices help with the success of things like buffalo rematriation and the reintroduction of buffalo into Indigenous lands. For Banff itself, the buffalo are fulfilling their role as a keystone species in the park. They've been creating a beautiful mosaic of different habitats for different types of animals. When we were out there, we had seen buffalo wallows where boreal toads were able to lay their eggs through the support of these buffalo. We've seen squirrels and different den animals taking their wool to insulate their nests and their dens for their babies. So I think that just that support, being able to show the success of these actions and being able to have this relative back on the land really showed that. But I think it also really does help create that deep connection with nature and being open to collaborate beyond just our world, and also including the spiritual realm. I think that buffalo rematriation can shift the paradigm of what conservation could be, and moving to a more relational approach. I really do think that the global community can embrace and learn from Indigenous peoples by centering climate change advocacy around care, reciprocity, and respect, and also recognizing that we are not separate from nature, that we are part of nature, and it's something that we need to foster a lot more of. Okay, next slide. So these are just some resources that we have, the different websites for the Buffalo Treaty, the work of the International Buffalo Relations, and then also for the film Singing Back the Buffalo. So I really do thank you all for your time today, and I'm open to any questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyra. This was incredibly powerful, and I think we've all learned from it. The resources that you've shared, we will share with everyone in the Bootcamp channel. And now it's time for Q&A. So please drop in the chat any questions that you have for any of the speakers so far. I already have a question for you, Kyra, and I know you've touched on some of this already, but can you tell us some of the tangible benefits of buffalo in driving climate adaptations? Why are buffalo specifically climate change fighters?
Well, thank you for that question. So for us in the prairie ecosystems and living on the prairies, buffalo are keystone species, and they provide a lot of tangible benefits to carbon sequestration, the restoration of natural grasslands, and also the support of other species. So I think that as a lot of people talk about buffalo as eco-engineers, and that's a term that we hear all the time about buffalo, is how they're able to restore these natural landscapes into what they once were. And I think that the removal of the buffalo from the prairie ecosystems created it really removed a lot of the key functions that they played. We know that their hooves aerate the soil, their mucus and their snot help break down grasses. Their dung really fertilizes the soil. They help in so many different ways that I think that there is a lot of Western science information that backs that up. But I think that it really is this reintroduction and remembering that relationship that Indigenous peoples had with them. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons why they were seen as such a significant relative to us, was because they played such a vital role in the health of our ecosystems and the place that we lived.
Shani, I don't know if you're speaking, but you are muted. I think Shania is having connection issues, but I'm gonna go ahead and ask the next question that I see here in our Q&A. This question is for Kamori from Shahad. Kamori, can you tell us about your experience as a party delegate advocating for cultural heritage policy at COP? What advice will you give us on climate activists who want to include heritage in their advocacy efforts?
Thank you so much for the question. I think at COP and a lot of negotiations and the dialogue that policymakers have, currently it's quite far removed from the realities that frontliners or people who advocate for culture-based climate action experience. And I think it's important that we point out to policymakers, negotiators, that culture really is part of your everyday life. Culture is not, starved in a museum. It's not idyllic. It's not static. It's moving. And once a language is stopped being spoken, a multitude of knowledge, a multitude of traditions also terminate to exist. And I think a lot of policymakers, a lot of negotiators have yet to come to terms with that, or rather have yet to be exposed to enough of those type of discussions. And the reality of negotiators is most of them have a national mandate to follow and a goal by the end of every negotiation to not have their red lines crossed. But really, climate negotiations and COP itself and the climate regime is constructed for the sake of future generations and for the sake of people who will come after us. So for that recognition to happen, it will be very helpful to have the media, the public, a lot more advocates point out that culture is part of us and it's part of a negotiator's life. It's part of a policymaker's life. So for that to be clear, and for them to recognize that a lot of negotiations have to happen beyond the national mandate, or else the climate regime will not function for everybody, like how we see in the presentations here. I think it's very vital.
Awesome. Thank you, Komori. We have time for one or two more questions. This next question is from Vaibhav Vora. Gunja and Sam, either of you, whoever wants to take this. The question is, a critique of culture-based solutions is that they're not scalable, which a lot of new age solutions like tech are able to solve for at scale and across diverse regions. What are your thoughts and experience about how this has worked? What is your response to this critique?
Thank you so much for the question, Vaibhav. And I think, one of the biggest critiques of culture-based solutions is that they're not seen as scalable in the same way that we see the tech-based solutions are. Because the issue is that these kind of cultural solutions, they cannot scale. It's that we've been conditioned to measure scale only through replication speed and like a uniformity across disciplines. But culture, on the other hand, it works through different mediums of adaptive knowledge, depth, and how that scaling process, it looks very different. And in a couple of the examples that we also talked through in the presentation today, in the legacy solutions, was that we don't really necessarily have the same cultural solution scaling in the same way a carbon tracking app, let's say, would do. But for instance, we talked about the Sundarbans, so the intergenerational knowledge of, we navigating weather patterns and, floods, cyclones, tides, all these kinds of weather patterns. It's now being embedded in the curriculum and in community-based disaster planning across the regions, not only in India and Bangladesh, but in, policy circles globally. So I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is the kind of impact that we are scaling through these culture-based solutions, and how deeper can we go when it comes to looking at these solutions, and which is a lot more that we can say for the tech-based advancements that we have, because culture solutions can last centuries, but can you say the same for the technological advancements? No, you cannot. So that's pretty much how I can sum this up.
All right, thanks, Gunjan. We'll take a final question. I'll point this to you, Kyra, but then if anybody else would like to answer it, please join in. And this is a question from Judd Azulia. Please excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name. The question is, how can we expect Indigenous communities and traditional cultures to adapt to climate change using the same mechanisms that have historically oppressed them? The tools and systems that created the crisis cannot be the ones to solve it. So how do we overcome that barrier?
I think that one of the things that we need to think about is how are we supporting Indigenous peoples in their sovereignty and autonomy over the care of their lands. I think that you're exactly right that these mechanisms are one of the issues. And I think that rethinking that and reframing that in a way that we're supporting other ways of knowing, Indigenous ways of being, all of these different things that supported a lot of our environments and our landscapes for millennia and for generations. Here in the prairies, we talk about how we've been here since time immemorial. I think that that's one of the terms that we talk about, and how we cared for this space and we cared for this area for that amount of time. But being removed from there, having other species removed from these spaces has also created this situation and climate catastrophe that we are in. And I think that once we are able to reintroduce these ways of knowing and giving Indigenous people sovereignty over their land and being able to go back into those systems of care is something that I really think that we need to do. I think that it's not saying those tools and those systems aren't useful that are created, but there's other ways of doing things, and there's other things that we could be supporting Indigenous-led efforts.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else want to add to that?
I just want to point
All right,
out that
great. We are at time.
all good. You can move on.
All right. Well, thank you, Kamori and Kyra, for not only these incredible presentations, but for taking time out to answer these questions. We have a myriad of questions coming out because people have enjoyed learning from you and want to learn so much more. And we'll be sure to link to the resources that you've discussed and you've shared as well. With that, we're going to end the Q&A session, and we're going to move towards our interactive exercise. So throughout this conversation, we've discussed the importance of learning from global cultural heritage. Let's start documenting it. So for this exercise, you'll work on it individually. And on the next slide, you'll see more information about it. And the question we'll ask you to consider is, how is climate change threatening cultural heritage around the world? For you specifically, we'd like you to share A, the problem, an example of cultural heritage in your region that is at risk due to climate change, and 2, a possible solution. How can this threat be addressed? Now, I'd like us to do this together. Remember this question. We're going to share with you a link, which is where this exercise will happen. Please open this link, the link you see on screen, the link I've just dropped in chat. As you open it, click on Add Point, which should be in the top right corner. All right, I want everyone to do this together. Make sure you have the link open. You can click on Add Point in the top right corner. All right, let's move on to the next slide, Sam. Now let's talk about what you have to input. I'll use one of our current pins as an example. So as soon as you click on Add Point, you'll see that you have to add a couple of fields. The first thing is to search for a place. The example we have is something that I input. This place is Ibrahim Hedri, which is near Karachi, Pakistan. You cannot just add something manually. It has to be something that's searchable on the map just because of how the algorithm and tech works. Then you're going to add a title. Ensure that your name is in the title. So my title was The Fishing Village of Ibrahim Hedri, response by Sania Irfan. Then you add a description. This is where you respond to the prompt, right? The problem, and here we want to make sure you can explicitly add the problem and the solution. So the problem I illustrated was Ibrahim Hedri is a fishing village near Karachi. I'm going to pause for a second. People are having trouble with the link. I think there was just a bit of a typo in what we sent over. We're going to correct that and send it to you in a second. So here is the problem that we have. Ibrahim Hedri is a fishing village near Karachi. It's the largest city in Pakistan. And due to industrialization and climate change, the ocean is getting increasingly polluted, harming marine life and making it difficult to earn a living from fishing. The mangroves, which act as natural barriers against the storm, are like saints for the people of Ibrahim Hedri, and those are also at risk. As a result, the traditional ways of living of the community are at risk. And the solution, we can take inspiration from the work of Fatma Majid, who is an artivist and daughter of a fisherman from Ibrahim Hedri. We could respond to the problem in 2 ways. 1, documenting and archiving cultures and traditions, and 2, advocating for saving the ocean and mangroves, which will in turn protect the life and culture in Ibrahim Hedri. And Fatma continues to do just that. Last year, in collaboration with artist Fazal Rizvi, she developed an art exhibit in Karachi, where a cookbook of recipes and memories of Ibrahim Hedri. She also created a table inspired by the boats of fishermen in Ibrahim Hedri, and she took visitors on a tour, sharing the tales, heritage, and challenges of the people of Ibrahim Hedri. And then we'll ask you to add more information. If you'd like to add a link for additional resources, you can do that. We'll also ask you to add your email address. And then finally, you'll have to click add point or update point if you're making a change. We'll have these instructions on screen. I'm noticing that a lot of people are still having trouble. It might be because of the tiny URL. So we're going to give people access to the direct link as well, which Gunjan has just dropped in the chat. Please check if you can access that. If you're having any trouble with this link, let us know in the chat. All right, cool. It sounds like that's working out for folks. Okay, we're going to take 10 minutes from now. Please stay on mute. Feel free to be off camera, but stay connected and add your points to the map. When you're back, we'll ask some of you to share what you wrote and take a minute or two each. Be back in 10 minutes.
Sorry, I would just like to point out that if you have trouble understanding what the actual exercise is, you can look at the other pins on the map and see the context, and you will understand what exactly you have to do.
We've also dropped the prompt in chat again.
I'm sorry, I can't access the link. I open it, I can't really access it. It's not opening in my own file.
I'm not sure I understood that, Esther, but we've added a new link that seems to be working for most folks. Please make sure you're looking at the last message that I sent. And for people who missed out on what you're supposed to do, go to the link that we just shared and answer the prompt, which is also in chat. And instructions for how you enter things at the link are on your screen. Photos are not mandatory.
And so you can add on the maps, you can add either tangible or intangible examples of heritage. That can be a monument in your community, it can be a festival, it can be an archaeological site, and what is the problem that they are facing in regards to climate change and your proposed solution or strategy. If you want, you can check, refresh the page and see some of the examples of pins that are coming in, and that will be helpful.
Right, folks, we're going to be back in a minute. All right, folks, please start clicking add point if you haven't already. We're going to start with a share out. So anyone who's already done and would like to share what they have written as part of this prompt, please raise your hand and we'll be able to hear from a couple of you. All right.
It's also great to see
Folks,
already
please start coming back.
the map. This is going to be a beautiful collection of problems and solutions. So raise your hand if you would like to tell us more about the point that you added on the map, or we can start calling some people on the screen.
Sam, why don't we start with the prompt that you had shared, which is in a different part of the world altogether from the prompt we heard at the start.
Sorry, I had a hard time hearing you. Can you go ahead or repeat yourself?
Why don't we get started with your response? We all started and did the exercise as ENC Pavilion team as well.
The Vizcaya Bridge, which is in the Basque Country in Spain, and this is UNESCO World Heritage Site that is currently facing several climate distresses, including ocean rising sea level. And so I think that this is an example of how we need local climate adaptation strategies, including heritage sensitive planning and real-time monitoring, so that if there is any ocean surges or different threats, the city can respond accordingly, especially to install flood barriers, improve drainage, maybe cover the current bridge with some resistant resilience materials. That will be some of the proposed solutions. But of course, I'm sure there are better expert than myself on this issue, but I see that Siddharth just raised his hand, so maybe we can hear from you, Siddharth. We don't see you, but I see you raise your hand.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I picked up a site in Mumbai, India. Uh, Yeah, so this is, I'm not sure if you're there yet. Could you find it in the map?
I think it's just taking a second for Sam's screen to reflect it, but you can get started, Siddharth.
Yeah. So in Mumbai, there is this Victorian Gothic Art Deco, which is basically Mumbai's UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it is rich architecture legacy. It has structures like Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Terminus and Aero Cinema. And the city, Mumbai, heavily faces monsoon rains and the rising sea level, and this increase the humidity, and all of which are now contributing to deteriorating the historical building. Uh, for instance, in 2005, the Mumbai flood uh, by extreme rainfall events highlighted the city's susceptibility to climate disasters. And the possible solution that I have listed are basically comprehensive risk assessment that we were actually doing as part of our project. Then improved urban infrastructure. Then there are few policy integrations that need to happen. Yeah, more details you can find out in the structure that I have filled in. You can go to Mumbai, India, and find out this cultural heritage.
All right, great. Thanks, Siddharth. Next, I see Amrish Shah's hand. Amrish, where is your pin and what is the problem and solution?
All right. All right. Hi, everyone. So my pin is in Kathmandu, Nepal. So if you can go there, there should be a single pin right there. Kathmandu, Nepal, right at the center. Yes, that's my pin. So this is one of the projects that I was doing and I'm currently in process of completing. So in Kathmandu, we have a few refugees community. Mainly one of the refugee community that we are working with is Rohingya refugees. And there are two other communities that we are working with, the Sukumbasi, who are also the landless Nepali community, and the urban poor families. So all of these three communities are suffering from housing injustice and the climate crisis. And many of the people or population living in this city have no idea about this community and what they are going through. So during rainfall, during winter season, this refugee community and these not so privileged community have tough time bearing the season, as well as they often suffer from several diseases during this season. So one of the projects or one of the initiatives that I took in these three community was highlighting the issue of this community. So what we did was empower young people in this community to reclaim their stories. So how do we do that? So while working on a very stringent and limited resources, what we did was, since most young people have access to a simple mobile phone with a camera access, so we provided them with training on how to tell stories with mobile photography. So we taught them advocacy for change and storytelling, as well as narrative building to bring social change in your own community. Uh, and we turned that into a photography exhibition. It was a very controversial exhibition, given these are all politically sensitive communities, and we had to fight with some of our donor agencies and organizations just to ensure that these less represented communities were heard of. So we organized a small photography exhibition by these vulnerable uh, young people from these communities, and made sure that people know their stories. And in this and this project is not just yet over. We are currently trying to scale up on this project so that we can help them with housing improvements or retrofitting, so that even though they live in temporary housing and settlements, we can make their lives better. So I have added some links to my pin in the map, so you can go through it and find extra details. And I've also added a demo gallery that we prepared for this project, where you can see photographs documented by our amazing young people from these 3 vulnerable communities. So thank you so much for hearing me out.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing your work, Amresh. All right, next hand I see is Panan Henry. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name. Panan, if you can
Okay.
go off mute, let us know where in the world your pin is and what your problem and solution are.
Okay. Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. My name is Panan Henry. You pronounced that fairly well. I'm from Nigeria. So my problem is in Toru, Bauchi State here in Nigeria. What we have is a problem with the site that is sacred to some indigenous people. We call them the Jara people in Nigeria. We have pythons there. They see these pythons as protectors, and most of their masquerade site. I don't know how to explain masquerade. It's just like it's a spiritual site. It's mostly on the mountain. So, but because of the need for more agricultural land, most of the mountain is being scraped, and the pythons are disappearing. And also, agricultural activities makes it susceptible for poachers to actually hunt these lions. And so, because of that, it's actually affecting the traditional worshippers who use the mountain as a sacred region. And it is driving most of them out of the region completely, because the place is now barely a mountain. It's just a hill with rocks, and it's terrible. So the solution I have here is communities, because in Nigeria, communities have a strong sense of ownership of the law. So what I have here is that they should have a bylaw in the community which prohibits unauthorized usage of the land for agricultural purposes, for lumbering, and for hunting and other activities that may, bring disaster to land. Because, like I said, the communities are like the custodians of laws in the country. So it is very important for them to be involved, because if we are waiting for the law enforcement agencies, they barely do anything. But then when it is with the communities, they usually do a better job. Thank you very much for listening.
All right, thank you, Panan. Next, I see Fiza Muhammad. Fiza, where is your pin and what are your problems and solutions?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Fiza. My place that I've been is Kochi, Kerala, which is in the southern part of India. So the heritage site which I've chosen is Matancheri Palace. So Matancheri Palace is actually a very important site for all Malayalis around Kerala, because it is an important cross-cultural heritage site, because it was a palace that was built and gifted by the Portuguese to the king of Kochi, and especially after the ruling of Portuguese, such as with Vasco da Gama over Cochin as well. So it is also part of the tentative list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. But one of the main problems that have been in Cochin for the past few years, especially since the 2018 flooding, was the rising sea levels and the frequent flooding that has been caused by climate change. And this palace holds a lot of invaluable and artifacts. So I think it's really necessary to protect such an important heritage sites that um, embraces the history of our nation. So I think the possible solution to this is probably awareness, because not a lot of people in my state know about this palace's existence, as well as raising funds for the restoration of the palace as well. Like when second restoration was done by the Archaeological Survey of India, which was completed in 2009. And another factor is we have to strengthen our drainage system, because another major problem is our drainage systems in Cochin are quite inadequate because of the waste management as well. And I think we need to implement buffer zones and green infrastructure as well, such as mangroves to help as natural flood barriers and to prevent soil erosion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Fiza. We have time for one more person. So I'm going to go to Priya Bharti, who I see next on my screen. Priya, tell us where your pin is and what your problem and solution are. Wait, can
Yeah.
anyone hear Priya? Because I can't.
No, but I see you are not muted, but unfortunately we cannot hear you properly. So maybe we can move on to Paul or Parul, sorry.
All right, Parul Gurjar, is it? Parul, can you please unmute, tell us where your pin is and what your problem and solution are?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear
Hello.
you.
Yeah. So hello everyone for joining us and thank you all of you for giving this opportunity to tell us a problem and reflecting upon a solution. So if you can just zoom in and you can see in the central Indian part of our country, which is Madhya Pradesh, and where there is a city of Madhya Pradesh, which is also a capital called Bhopal. So there you can just see a problem. The problem is a threat to the Ramsar site of Bhopal. So basically, Ramsar site, as you all know, are the protective sites, wetland sites, which are need to be protected, and they are globally recognized. So the problem over there is that the wetland has been facing problem of human interventions, loss of endemic species, and pollution load was increasing. So for that matter, there is a solution that I proposed, that a committee of people who are working over there, like the local communities, local urban bodies, scientists, wetland specialists, local activities, fishermen communities, NGOs, all of them have to sit together and decide upon this thing, because in the year 2010 there was an incident happened where the entire wetland was dried due to climate change, and then this decision has been made, and we, being the researcher of Bhopal University, have started acting upon it. So we have been working on this. I am a specialist in the sector of fisheries and ichthyofauna. So I, along with the other researchers and scientists, we have worked on that. And by the passage of time and with the amalgamation of people's contribution, the lake has been restored, and it has come in the light of everyone, and so many people have joined us, and that's how we made the life of that particular lake again, and that's how that problem has been solved. And also the people have become more active, and they have responded very positively towards it, and that's how the lake is surviving so well. And this particular thing is there, and also this has happened because of the proper monitoring and people awareness. So these two things, I felt that has been key things which has been there over the past 10-15 years, and that's how this entire case study I put over here. And I hope that such kind of monitoring and people's participation stay, and only then we can have our entire natural landscape in the same form which we have received from our ancestral generations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Parul. This was great and is actually a great segue to what I'm going to say next. We are over time, so we're going to have to stop with the share out at this point, but we'll share the map with you. And I think what we've seen right now is some solutions that, while they're locally rooted, have the ability to impact us globally. So before your next session, what we're going to ask you to do is share your responses to this next prompt on the Bootcamp channel, which is, what is a solution shared by someone else that could help protect your region's cultural heritage? How could you adapt that solution to your local context? So we'll share this question in the Bootcamp channel, where we'll also share some action items and resources. And as a reminder, the Bootcamp channel is the only official platform where we communicate with you. So please make sure to join that. If you have any questions, reach out to the UNFCCC at the email address that's been shared before. But you're welcome to connect with one another after. Our next workshop is the week after next. So not next week, the week after next on Tuesday, 27th May. And that is going to be about intersectional activism. Before we leave, and since I had a few of you on camera, I'm going to ask if as many of you can turn on the camera as possible. We're going to take a quick screenshot / group selfie. All right, I'm seeing cameras come on. Let's go.
Can we also stop screen sharing?
I think it does it without the screen sharing anyway, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And please do not forget to scan the QRs to connect with us. Next session is going to be, as Sania said, on the 27th or 26th, sorry, 27th. But this is the best way to stay in touch with us. We have some great activations planned for BON and COP30, and we will be making announcements in our social media channels as well.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I
Thank you.
lost the link. I can't really access the link to write my prompts.
That's okay, Esther. We'll share it again on the Bootcamp channel shortly.
Thank you.
And then for
Thank
folks
you.
who still have questions on attendance
Thank you
time, do
so
you mind
much.
going to the FAQ slide for a second? We're getting a lot of those questions again. So maybe we stay on that for a minute as people hop off. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, bye,
Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, bye,
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, bye, bye.
Bye. See you next time.
Playing each other.
Hi, sorry, where's the frequently
Bye.
asked questions?
See you next time.
If it says one.
Those are on your screen. These are the frequently asked questions on participation. And if you're having trouble accessing the Bootcamp channel, please email Youth for Capacity at this email address.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.